Welcome to 5 Points Blues presentation of Back to the Basics. Everything you wanted to know about Cowboys football, but were too afraid to ask. Here are your hosts, Nikki Harrison and Kristi Scales.
It's Tuesday, so that means it's Back to the Basics. Everything you wanted to know about Cowboys football, but were too afraid to ask. I'm Nikki Harrison here with Kristi Scales. We have back with us Bryan Broaddus. Thank you for coming back and joining us.
I'm glad I passed the audition the first time to come back. I feel very blessed.
Our first repeat guest, by the way.
That's right.
No,
that's right.
The fact is,
my gum on your shoe. You can't get rid of it.
well, last week it was a preview. What
Yes.
we thought was going to happen, what had gone into the process of the draft, and now
Right.
it's a review of roster holes that were filled or maybe not, what took place over the weekend. But the big news this week, in addition to the rookies that are going to come in next week and the undrafted guys that have been signed, is, of course, Jason Witten. We still don't have a resolution to that. So your 14 years experience in NFL draft rooms.
Right.
Friday morning, the news breaks that Jason Witten is considering leaving because of the broadcasting offer. What's going on in the war room?
Right.
Because plans may have changed.
Yeah, I think that the Cowboys, you're always going to put your board together. We talked about last week the stack and the way it goes. But we're also talking about the board from positional aspect. And you know, maybe you're thinking like, okay, we really like, it's more than really Jason Witten. It's like, okay, do you like Blake Jarwin? Do you like Rico Gathers? Do you like, and now you lost a couple of guys. I mean, well, if you lose Witten, you're going to lose him and you're going to lose Hannah.
That's right.
So you're kind of thinking about that anyway. Okay, how do we replace James? Hannah is really what, I think you're looking at. And the news came down as far as the potential of losing Jason Witten. And I think they did a really good job overall not panicking. You know, it could have been real easy for them to say, and the Philadelphia Eagles made a big deal about it, trading ahead of the Cowboys and drafting Dallas Goedert and all that. And the Cowboys weren't fazed by that. They weren't going to take Dallas Goedert. They were going to take Connor Williams. That was their guy. That was their guy all along. But that it's news that you say, okay, well, this is what we have to maybe think about, in the coming days or at the draft. But it was something that they were prepared for by the way they had their board set up. You just don't go in the draft and say, oh, well, we've got the Green Bay Packers don't just say, well, we're not going to evaluate any quarterbacks because we have Aaron Rodgers. You still have to put your board together and you have to still give the players their due. And Dalton Schultz, who was on their board, who they drafted, obviously they felt like, okay, this is a guy that we need to go get, regardless if something happens with Jason Witten or something happens with some other position or with the tight end position. So I don't think they were shocked. I think they were prepared. But you're in a situation where Jason Witten hadn't missed any practices for these, the captain's practices. Where our offices are, how it is. You can look out the back window and see Jason Witten out there practicing with the captains and the team, and you can see him out there. We're getting ready for the OTAs and the minicamp, and really no indication. But you knew that the time was coming at some point in time, and obviously he's considering a very, very lucrative offer to do something that not many people get to do, and that's the only way I see Jason Witten maybe going away from no longer being a Dallas Cowboy.
Yeah. Now, Nikki, I mean, you've been in the broadcasting business for a long time now. What do you think of Jason Witten's prospects as a broadcaster?
Well, I think it would be great. I mean, future Hall of Famer.
Sure.
I think it would be great, especially for what the talk is Monday Night Football.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is that where Jason is different, and you get nowadays, I think people want to be educated when they watch the broadcast.
Absolutely.
I think
we can see that from what Tony Romo did.
Well, and you're absolutely right, Nikki. Tony Romo has made other broadcasters around the league have to work harder at their job. If you notice more, Troy Aikman was doing more telestration stuff, more pointing out, not guessing of the plays. Tony could not guess. Tony knows. He could see coverage. He goes, okay, blitz is going to come from this side. They're going to throw it over here. That's not guessing. That's knowing what's going on. But what Tony's done is he's made other broadcasters have to work harder at their jobs with preparation and then also explaining. And I think with Jason Witten, I'm always, and I said this morning on our show on Talking Cowboys, I felt like that Jason, was always going to be a coach. I felt like that his calling was, once he was done from football, to be a coach. And this the television aspect of it doesn't surprise me, but I always kind of thought he was going to go another route. But he does the television stuff, like Nikki says. Here's a guy that can explain the nuts and bolts of what's going on. He can explain it in layman's terms. I think that's the most important thing. Your idea is to try and educate the fans.
Right. Yeah.
That's number one thing.
And I think when you say going into coaching, and I agree with you, and anybody who knows Jason Witten, you see that as a natural progression. He was linked to the opening at the University of Tennessee.
If he had been out of the league,
season,
if he'd been coaching for 2 years, I think he would have applied for that job.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But here's the thing: the reason why we all say that is we've seen Jason Witten over the 15 seasons he was here. He arrived as a kid, left Tennessee early.
Wow.
It's so young, but he's a leader of men. And even though he may not go into coaching in the near or far down the line, the exposure that you get as a national broadcaster, the exposure you get as a former Dallas Cowboy, it is such a platform, not only to continue what he does with the SCORE Foundation, but he can be a leader of men, a leader of everyone, all people, because of, he's going to have such a great platform,
right.
More than just a former player who does his own foundation work or helps out former teammates or current players. But I think it's outstanding. Look at what Aikman continues to do.
I think we watch games for the game. Yeah, I understand what you're saying with the platform and all. I get that. I don't turn on a game just to watch Tony Romo.
Well,
I find myself, and you feel free to disagree with me.
No, I agree.
I think Monday Night Football deserves better games.
Absolutely, they've been getting dog matchups the last several years.
I think now that since NBC has taken over, and no disrespect to NBC, but if I was at ESPN, I'm like, listen, I pay my lion's share of this work too. I'm trying to get this. The Sunday night games are outstanding. And sometimes you're at a little bit of the mercy, but I just feel like Sunday Night Football, if I'm going to pick one night to watch, the matchups are generally better on Sunday Night Football. Sure. Now, can Jason Witten or can Peyton Manning or can whoever you bring in there and put in that chair, if it's not a good matchup, we're not going to be interested in that. They need to do something. But I to your point, Kristi, I understand the leader of men and all that. I just feel like, though, that it hopefully, if he was able to do some of those things you're talking about, it's with an audience that's watching the game.
Exactly. It's an expanded audience.
Yeah, and not watching 3 and 9 teams battle it out on Monday Night Football. I'm very good friends with John Gruden, and John did this for a long time. And John always talked about, he goes, man, I just wish we'd get some better games. I just wish we'd get some better games because we've been on a stretch. We had some bad games. And you're a little bit at the mercy of how the season goes. You don't know if Dallas is going to be better or the Buccaneers are going to be better or the Jacksonville is going to be better. There was a time there we were watching the Tennessee-Jacksonville matchup on Thursday night every Thursday, that kind of matchup. And then Jacksonville got better. Tennessee's got a little bit better. So now it's a little bit better matchup. Well, they don't have that matchup anymore. They'll put somebody else in there that's not as good. The Rams seem like to be a team, but I think that I know me. I watch because of the matchup and not because of the broadcasters, and that's something that I think that now the broadcasters can make the game bad for me, where I can just turn it down, But I am not. The reason why I don't watch as much Monday Night Football is because, again, I just feel like that you're burnt out from the weekend, but the game. There's no interest for me to sit and watch.
Talk a little bit about. So you're saying Sunday night, great matchups.
Oh, yeah.
Because they pay the most money, so they get to cherry pick the games.
You answered my question. Before.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But you know what? ESPN has been a longtime partner. ESPN has carried. They have picked up Monday Night Football movie. Now that when ABC became partners with ESPN and all that. It's just like you're figuring, okay, well, for how many years have we watched Monday Night Football? Mm-hmm. And it was always the marquee game.
And it was the only primetime game.
It was the only primetime game. And we grew up with that. And this is to me why Jason Witten needs to leave. Because I still believe that Monday Night Football, even with the bad matchups, it's still Monday Night Football. It's still that opportunity. It's this iconic brand that you can be a part of. The history of Monday Night Football is tremendous. And maybe Jason Witten can be what you're talking about, come back and bring that back, but they need to help him with some games. That's something that John Gruden always told me. He goes, I just wish we'd get some better games.
Yeah. Well, you talk about tuning in, you'll turn off because of broadcasters,
Right.
but you're tuning in for the game. And I agree, but growing up as #1 sports fan for
no
whatever,
doubt.
as a kid, and as the world self-proclaimed #1 Ryan Sandberg fan, the Hall
Sure.
of Fame second baseman for the Cubs, I mean, every afternoon I'm watching the Cubs on WGN,
That's,
in
college,
the 1980s. And would schedule
Rick Ruschel,
classes. The only person in college who would schedule classes in the morning so that I could be home in the afternoon to watch the Sandberg and the Cubs. But one reason why I watched it was Steve Stone, not Harry Carey, but Steve Stone, because I learned something every broadcast, whether it was tipping pitches or how a second baseman and a shortstop communicate, deciding who's going to cover second in the case of a steal. So for me, that's how I measure broadcasters.
Right.
Is, did I learn something about the game or a strategy within the, anything in the context of the game or about a player or a team? And that's what Romo was so great at last year. And to your point, Witten will do the same thing.
I worried about Tony talking over my head.
But he didn't.
He
brought it down.
You've seen before, because Kristi, on road trips, I've sat behind you. You and Brad and Babe sat in front of us where we all sit on plane flights home, and I'd have my pad watching the game on the way home, and Tony would stop, and he would always. It took him 15 minutes to explain a play. And that's what I worried about Tony. I was worried about how quick. I knew Jim Nantz could feed him the ball all day. I just worried about how quickly would he talk over my head, and I didn't feel like he did that at all. So again, Jason Witten, I think he'll learn. He'll pick up some tips. In fact, if he goes and does this, and I think that we should all, I don't know how you pass up an opportunity like this. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah. But let's talk about. You mentioned Schultz earlier. He's
Sure.
the tight end out of Stanford
Dalton
that
Schultz,
the Cowboys drafted mid-rounds, 5th round
Right.
pick. So Stanford actually runs a pro-style kind of offense. A tight end,
Shaw,
a tight end who actually can block coming
Yeah.
into the NFL. How do you see Schultz's skill set and how he was used and how that fits into coming here with the Cowboys?
Well, you're absolutely right. David Shaw was. I was with David at Philadelphia.
That's the head coach of the Stanford Cardinals.
David Shaw. Yeah, his father was a longtime NFL coach. David, the head coach, he took over for Harbaugh. He was Harbaugh's offensive coordinator at Stanford. And so it's still a tough-minded. Those kids might be extremely smart, book smart, but they're very tough kids when it comes to playing football. And so with Dalton Schultz, you get a guy that will play with that inline Y. That tight end is the Y position that plays along the line of scrimmage. In this day and age, we're seeing a lot more in the college game of guys playing detached or away from blocking in the line.
Meaning they're receivers and don't have to block.
Yeah, exactly. They're more guys that run routes than they are blockers. So Schultz is an inline Y. You see him, he blocks on defensive ends. He blocks on outside linebackers. He blocks up inside. So he's a guy that more when the Cowboys run the football, that the Cowboys, that's what they want to do. They want to run the ball. They want to put a tight end on the line. They want to put another guy next to him. But the combination blocks with tackles, tight ends, that's what Dalton Schultz can do. And so in the 5th round, it made a lot of sense. There were 2 really good blocking tight ends in this draft. There was Dalton Schultz and they're both in the Pac-12. So Dalton Schultz and then Will Dissly from Washington. And Will Dissly went around ahead. But, I tell you what, though, I think they got a really good one because, again, it's about how many bodies can you put at the point of attack? What kind of push can you get? And with Schultz and Smith and Collins and now Connor Williams and Frederick, they will have a group that once again will be able to get push in the running game.
We're on Back to the Basics. Give us a call, 888-855-2297. That's 888-855-2297. Bryan, I want to ask, how did you feel about the overall draft?
Yeah. You guys, I usually put in I used to have a top 50 is what I do, top 50 players. And the Cowboys off my top 50 board took 3 players. They took player 27, 28, and 37 off my board. So if any time I had 2nd round grades on all the players that were taken for the Cowboys and that first 3 picks. So I felt that part of it was a really, really good start. I love the pick of Mike White, the quarterback. I absolutely love that one. That was Kellen Moore and I were talking about it at lunch one day. He was going to work out Mike White at Western Kentucky. I said, this was a while back. This is in March, late February after the combine. I said, hey, you going to Western Kentucky by any chance? He says, yeah, I am. I'm going to a couple places. I said, man, you're going to like this Mike White kid. And sure enough, he did. I mean, he went and worked him out. He did the work in the room. The scouts had him graded right. So, yeah, a fifth-round pick for Mike White's like a lottery ticket. It's like going down to the Texas lottery and buying a lottery ticket, and then here we go. We're gonna, and you hit it. So I love that pick. I love the Armstrong pick, the defensive end from Kansas. Don't let the school fool you. That's a basketball school and all that. Yes, they've had a lot of problems in the Big 12 with football. But this is one of those kids that reminds me very much of what Ron Leary was at Memphis. Ron Leary was on a very bad football team at Memphis, but he was always the hardest playing guy. This Armstrong kid is a violent football player, and he can rush the passer. He can cause problems in the running game. They were going to try and trade back into the draft in the third round to grab him. We saw a bunch of activity in the war room where the Cowboys were scurrying around. We thought they were trying to trade back in for the safety Tavarius Moore, but it happened to be they were trading back in for Armstrong. Wow. And they didn't get there. And then Governor Abbott said, well, hey, don't worry about it. We just sit here and we'll be fine. And Governor Abbott was right. He sat there and was fine. So, I'm really happy with what they did with overall. I think that Cedric Wilson, the wide receiver from Boise, brings a little bit different dynamic. It's a crowded wide receivers room. And Cedric Wilson has the ability to run the routes and stuff. I don't think he has the separation of Michael Gallup when we look at how they run routes. But he's a really good player. And Bo Scarborough will remind you of Brandon Jacobs, if you remember Brandon Jacobs.
Yes, sure. He had a bruiser for the Giants.
Yeah.
He just ran over everybody.
Yeah, he's a big body guy that will run over people. And so, if it's as a seventh-round pick, if he's going to have to make this team, or if he's going to make this team, it's going to be about special teams for him. Jerry Jones will always tell you that if you're the third running back on this team, one of the 46 that dress on game day, you're going to have to play special teams. And I don't know if Bo Scarborough can play special teams. I know he can run over me. I know he can catch it somewhat. I don't think he's a very good pass blocker, and he plays no special teams. So that one right there is going to be a long shot.
Yeah, he's going to have to now.
Yeah, exactly.
But I want to go back to something you were talking about with Armstrong.
Yeah.
Because it goes to a point that we talked about last week here on this podcast. And by the way, when you mentioned Governor Abbott, yes, the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, the reason why he had product knowledge of Armstrong, and that's because even though Kansas is not a football school,
right.
in the Armstrong's sophomore season, they had the big upset win over the Texas Longhorns, which Abbott remembered. And in that game, Armstrong had 2 sacks and a few tackles for loss, forced fumble recovery.
He got Charlie Strong fired is what it is.
He basically did. But here's the thing. Yeah. You mentioned that the Cowboys tried to get back up in the third round to get Armstrong. He ended up falling to the fourth round.
Yeah.
And that's because his measurables at the NFL Scouting Combine, one of the slowest times, one of the worst vertical jumps, and one of the fewest amount of reps of the way.
Yeah.
So that goes, we were talking last week about measurables versus the gut feeling, or I guess the word would be trusting the tape.
Right, trust the tape.
Is he like the perfect example of that?
He is a perfect example. He's probably not for everybody, but when you watched him play against Big 12 competition, you mentioned the Texas game, matter of fact, he went against Connor Williams. We interviewed Connor Williams. Connor's like, oh, yeah, I remember him well. So, I think Dorrance Armstrong is a guy that's more about the tape than he really is about the measure. There's guys in this league that don't test well when you talked about wearing T-shirts and shorts, but you put a helmet on them, shoulder pads, and football pants, they figure it out real fast. And he's one of those kids that I think figured it out. Don't look at the measurables. Look at what the player is. I think you'll appreciate him. I really do.
Speaking of Connor Williams, that I felt like that was one of the ultimate feel-good stories.
Yeah.
The way he talked about being bullied from Coppell, right?
Right. Yeah.
And having to overcome that.
The stuttering problems. Yeah. Yeah, he's an interesting guy just because I used to do, for 4 years, I did Coppell football on the radio with Ted Emmerich. And so when Connor Williams' senior year was our first year at Coppell doing the game. So it was kind of funny when I remind him, he's like, oh my gosh, I remember now. I'm like, yeah. But yeah, I was really surprised that he was there at 50. I really, really was. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you how special he was. The Cowboys had a chance to trade. We were talking about Earl Thomas at Seattle. The Cowboys had a chance to trade. Seattle was willing to take the 50th pick and send Earl Thomas, and the Cowboys said, no, we like Connor Williams too much to part with that. It was a very difficult decision, but they felt like that Connor Williams could help them more than Earl Thomas could. So they stood in there and made the pick, and away they went. So it's a very good story. It's a great story, the fact the kid is a local kid. His brother was on the practice squad here, or actually, in training camp here as a quarterback a few years ago. So, but I couldn't be happier for him to get that opportunity. His family to get to see their son play for the Dallas Cowboys is great too. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, the bullying story. Connor Williams, he's going to use his Cowboys platform to address that. But do you know which current player and team captain was bullied as a kid and does a lot at the local schools and back home in Canada? There's your hint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the biggest, baddest dude on the team, Tyrone Crawford.
Right.
Yeah.
His cause is anti-bullying, and
Right.
that's because when he was a kid, he had some learning disabilities, and so he would get teased by classmates. And the biggest, baddest dude out there is getting bullied.
Yeah.
But it's because of the learning disabilities, which he works so hard, and tutors and mentors and other stuff to overcome that. But and I've been at several events, whether it's Frisco ISD or in Arlington or Dallas, where Tyrone has been in front of school kids, particularly junior high. I mean, because imagine that time. Remember that time in our lives in junior high? It is so powerful when someone like Tyrone gets up there and talks about how he felt.
Right.
Because the bullies know who they are.
They
know
do.
who they are.
And when the biggest, baddest dude, Dallas Cowboy, is up there telling them it's not cool.
Right.
Yeah, it's again
They
we
feel
talk
this
we
big.
talk about using your platform.
Oh,
and
sure.
So
Absolutely.
we're
Absolutely.
proud of guys like Tyrone
Yeah.
who do that. So
Definitely.
we had some questions
We do.
that had
So
come
this
in.
one is kind of like a two-part question.
Okay.
There was talk when we got to our first pick.
Right.
And we did not trade up. People thought that we were going to trade up.
Derwin James, the safety,
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Why do you think the Cowboys didn't do that? Do you think they should have?
Right.
And then, do you also, Heckma in Garland wants to know, was Derwin James the Jabril Peppers of this year's draft?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that to answer the second part of that question, I had some scouts tell me, and this is not the Cowboy scouts, the scouts around the league, guys I was friends with, say, Brian, before the draft, be alert, Derwin James is going to slide in this draft. And a lot of it had to do with that people felt like that he didn't play up to the level that even though he was the best safety in the draft, there were people that felt like that he maybe kind of held back some and didn't play at a high enough level. And I'm like, man, I watched the tape. He looks pretty good to me. And they're like, no, he could play. The problem is he could play better. And so Los Angeles Chargers got a heck of a player, I think, right there. I never felt like that they were going to, even though I would have gone after Derwin James myself. I would have found, if once he got close enough, I would have found a way to go get that player. On their board, the way it was, they were not going to move from Van Der Esch. They were just not going to do it. That was the guy that we've talked about a bunch on our draft shows, talking Cowboys, all the things. Every time we talk about the draft, everybody say, who you taking? Who do they think they're going to take? So they're going to take Van Der Esch. They like the tape, they like the workout, they like the player. I mean, all these things about him. So they were never going to move from that.
Gotcha.
And so when it came down to their pick, you didn't see them react. When Derwin James went off the board, they were just waiting for, okay, what's the next pick going to be? And so I felt all along that they targeted this player. They did their homework on him. He's probably a lot higher grade than I have on my board for him. I'm sure they had him in the top 10. But that was something they were never going to move from. And we'll see, right or wrong. Should they have traded up for Derwin James? But they also were thinking that maybe they could have got a deal done with Earl Thomas. Maybe they didn't need the safety. So that kind of, I'll tell you one thing real quick, guys. They really like Jamil Showers. And they think that after being here for a couple of years that maybe Jamil Showers is ready to step in and maybe make this football team as a special teams guy and as a backup safety. So we'll see. He's been
now.
Yeah.
Wasn't Jamil Showers a quarterback?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, it's been 2 years.
He got moved from the practice squad.
Yeah.
This is the former Texas A&M and
Right.
UTEP quarterback.
Okay.
I was just, Nikki's got that look on her face, just like half the people watching right now are like, Jamil Showers, he's a quarterback.
Yeah, no,
well, he's been a safety.
He's been a safety the last 2 years, and they kind of feel like that he's developed in a point where at training camp that he'll have a chance to make this team. So we'll see.
Yeah.
They signed after the draft a couple of different guys, though, that can be potential safeties for him as well. So we'll see if it, in fact, a rookie, either Jamil Showers makes the team, or maybe there'll be somebody else out there that they sign that they can use.
J.J. Wilcox, the former Cowboy who had left for Tampa Bay and then got traded to Pittsburgh.
Right.
He just got released by Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Any possibility
they want a true free safety. They want somebody that can actually. That's why you make the Earl Thomas or potentially make the Earl Thomas,
because JJ's the thumper. He's a strong safety, a hard hitter.
They've got plenty of those guys. They want somebody that can play the middle of the field, and so that's the discussion that I had this morning with some guys. It's like, nah, we'll move on. But I will say this though, Terrell McClain, who was the defensive tackle here,
please get him.
Yeah, Terrell McClain is a good possibility that if they can work things out, that he would be back.
Oh,
so
I hope so.
He
Terrell,
and
his
him
3
and
years
Colin,
here.
yeah.
Oh, they were terrific inside together in 2016.
They sure were.
Yeah,
sure were.
that would be a great pickup. He left for big money with the Washington Redskins in free agency last season.
Yes,
and didn't work out for him in Washington, and a cost-cutting move, and they drafted a couple of defensive tackles.
Right.
So Terrell became unemployed Monday after the draft, and so it would be wonderful if the Cowboys could bring him back here. And Marinelli loved him. He was such a good player.
Yeah, he was really good with, like I said, next to Collins. I mean, you would like to have kept that group together. They could. He got nice money that he wasn't going to get here. I mean, basically, it looks like for the Redskins, it's a 1-year deal. They paid him for $7.5 million. So that's a lot of money for a guy that, you got from the Houston Texans and developed him, and he went on, but hopefully you can get him back.
Do you get him now, or do you kind of wait and see what you got with some of your get him? I agree. Don't wait. Don't try and get him cheaper later in the summer.
Don't let somebody else realize what a good player he is. He's smart, and even if he comes here on a 1-year deal, it'll be a situation where he knows the coaches, they know him. He knows the locker room. Everything about that was good. So.
Wow. So another question
that
Kristi actually brought to me. So she says to me, the draft, always remember that the draft is just one part of it.
Right.
There's rookie free agents that, need to be signed. What is that process? What are they doing right now?
Yeah, that's after the draft, they signed 18 kids that were not drafted. And usually what you try and do is the first players you go after are guys that were on your draft board. So say you didn't get to them, you had pick 236, you don't get to them, you took Bo Scarborough, so now you're out of the draft. Well, now when the draft's over, you're like, okay, who's on our board? Who's still in the 6th, 7th round that we can go and evaluate? And we'll probably hear the names, of these guys as far as who was where. But if I just point out a couple of guys, there's a kid, Travarius Ward from Middle Tennessee, that's a cornerback. I don't know why he wasn't drafted because he is outstanding. I mean, you watch his tape. He's got some special traits with the movement, the ability to play the ball in the air, the ball skills, all that.
Can he play inside too?
Well, he's a corner.
Outside?
He's a corner. Now, I'll tell you one. I'll give you a guy. Cam Kelly was an outside player for San Diego State as a corner. I think Cam Kelly can kick inside and be a safety, be that true free safety.
Or slot.
Yeah, or slot. He could play, And then the true free safety that I think they signed was a kid named Tyree Robinson from Oregon. And matter of fact, all these guys I mentioned right now are on DallasCowboys.com. I've got the scouting reports up. So if you want to do a little further research on them, those are my notes that'll be up on that. But they've signed some guys after the draft that should have been drafted. And for whatever reason, teams overlooked them. And this team has a great history because of Chris Hall, the coordinator of college scouting, that Chris won't let scouts come off their grades. If they've got them on a board, that's where they're going to be. They're not going to move them up and down rounds. If the guy's in the 5th and the scout says, no, he needs to be in the 7th. No, you've had him in the 5th round. So that's where we're going to leave him. So Chris does a really good job. But this team has a great history of signing guys after the draft, and maybe one or two of those guys making the football team. But like I say, keep an eye on Travarius Ward from Middle Tennessee. Really good player.
Yeah, great history. You mean some kid, some nobody from Eastern Illinois by the name of Tony Romo?
Yeah.
Do you mean the guy who led the NFL in interceptions as a rookie named Everson Walls?
Well, yeah.
Do you mean Cliff Harris, who's in the Ring of Honor?
Yeah. Miles
Dan Bailey,
Austin.
Miles Austin,
Yeah.
Jeff
right.
Heath,
Yeah.
Dan Bailey,
Yeah.
Pro Bowl guys. So just because fans don't recognize your name today doesn't
right.
mean that you don't have a chance. Because, Leighton Vander Esch, sure, he's going to get more opportunities
Right.
and be higher on the depth chart because of his draft status.
Right.
But ultimately, he's competing. These guys, when they come in, they're not just competing to get on the 53-man roster or the 10-person practice squad. I mean, by golly, they are competing for practice reps right now.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing,
Yep.
so that they can get the reps and then show the coaches. Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Well,
You get it right.
We solved it all. Yeah.
solved it all.
Kick off. We're
Problem
ready to
solved.
kick off the season.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
Brian, thank you for
Thank you, guys.
bookending it
Thank
the
you.
before
Appreciate
and
it.
after the
Thank
draft.
you.
We appreciate
Appreciate
it.
you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for joining us on everything you wanted to know about football, but were too afraid to ask, right here on 5 Points Blue.
This has been a production of 5 Points Blue, DallasCowboys.com, and the Dallas Cowboys Football Club.